What's up, everybody? Mr. Forrest back with another video today. I'm going to show you some of the hand motions and mnemonics I use when I'm teaching kids about salvation. Mnemonics is a memory device, something to hook it on, some way for them to remember. And because we always have our hands with us, I like to use my hands in hand motions. So when I taught soteriology to kids or the doctrine of salvation, I asked the question, what is salvation? And the way I would have them respond is that it means to be rescued from my sins and have a relationship with God. I'll explain that. In sign language, this is saved in sign language. Sort of like the picture is of being shackled and being set free. So again, to be rescued from my sins, put my hands up like this, bring them together, and have a relationship with God, like you're bringing a separated sinner near to God. So again, salvation is to be rescued from my sin and have a relationship with God. So here's how I teach what sin is. I ask, what is sin? And this is the response. Anything we do, say, or think that breaks God's law. And I explain to the kids about God's law being summarized in the 10 Commandments. So anything that we do that breaks God's law or say or think is sin. And then I like to ask kids, I say, who can name a sin? And whatever they say, I would classify that under doing, saying, or thinking that breaks the law. And kids need to know that it's not just something that they do. Because we all know sin is something we do. Well, now, if they have good behavior, now they think they've arrived. But no, it's also attitudes, sinful attitudes as well. So, for example, you can obey your parents, but if your attitude is fine, it's still sin. It's a sinful attitude. Even things that we believe, believing that there is no God, believing Jesus isn't the only way. These are things we think that breaks God's law. Things that we say, telling a lie, a corrupt communication, talking back to your parents. These are things that we say that breaks God's law. So sin is anything we do, say, or think that breaks God's law. And then I ask the kids, what does sin do, or better yet, like the consequences, but you might not want to use that word. What does sin do? Sin separates us from God. And I use this because, God, us, separated, okay? Then when you bring it to salvation, they understand it better, to be rescued from my sin and have a relationship with God. Because my sin separates me from God, now I'm here. I like to teach kids what redemption means. Redemption means to be bought and set free. Okay, so sign language for buy, to be bought and set free. Redemption is to be bought and set free. So when I'm teaching kids about justification, that's a huge word, but I want them to know, especially when we're talking about 5th and 6th graders, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, I want them to know what justification is. And we can do this one of two ways. God sees and declares me righteous. God sees, if you want to get goofy, you can do this. God sees and declares me righteous. There's a lot of teaching that goes along with this, but this is the summary of what justification is. God sees and declares me righteous. So because of what Jesus did, God looks at a believer and God does not see their sin. God sees them just as if they had always been Jesus, just as if they had always had the righteousness of Christ. God sees, and then in justification, the declarative act. They're declared righteous once and for all, in a judicial sense there. Substitution. When I'm teaching kids what substitution is, Jesus takes my place and gives me his. That's how I teach it. Jesus takes my place and gives me his. Jesus took my sin upon him, and he gave me his righteousness. And a good object lesson I like to use for this is with lab coats. So I have 2 lab coats, and before the preaching time, I'll have kids come up and using a permanent marker, write a sin on the lab coat that they struggle with. whether it's lying or cheating or stealing or anger or whatever. They write it on the lab coat in permanent ink. And I'll get 2 kids up, and I'll put one kid in the lab coat with all the sins written on it, and the other kid a fresh, clean lab coat. And I'll have the kids take the lab coats off and switch them, because that illustrates what substitution is. Jesus took our sinfulness upon himself, and he clothed us in his righteousness. Substitution. Finally, sanctification. When I'm teaching kids what that important word means, there's 2 aspects or 2 parts to sanctification: to be set apart and to be transformed. This is sign language for change. To be set apart and to be transformed. Now, these hand motions, I hope they're helpful to you, but there's a lot of other teaching that should go along and supplement these hand motions. But if you're basically summarizing these theological terms and you want to make them simple for kids, this is the way I do it. So I hope it's helpful for you guys. Let's teach kids the doctrine of salvation. Mr. Forrest out.